I don't know if you guys saw last night, the school board decided that they're probably not going to have us come back until at least after February. The official word right now is we don't know if that's going to affect that asynchronous week that's coming up. I'm going to talk about it today. But it's possible some of what I talk about today will be a little subject to change because of that. But we'll just have to keep being flexible in response to the schedule changes kind of as we have been. But all right, so you guys are about halfway through the class now. In terms of curriculum, we are halfway through the curriculum, is what I'm getting at. And that's exactly where we should be. Like, that's exactly where, according to the College Board, our class should be at this time of year. But I wanted to point out that we did get some guidance as AP teachers over the break for classes that are just getting to 1450. So basically classes that have only covered 1200 to 1450 in the first part of the year in response to virtual classes and COVID and all the kind of disruption we've had. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is we are very much on task, very much on schedule. I know this is, I think, everyone or most everyone's first AP class, and so I thought that might kind of help you guys understand we're in a good place, but I don't want that to make you complacent either. As you see on the screen, we have 125 days, or 124 days. Sorry, now that was from yesterday. So 124 days as of today to the AP test, and so we don't have that much time. It's 4 months. But of course, we're going to have some disruptions if we do end up going back at some point. We'll have spring break coming up. As you guys know, there's more holidays in this little section of the year too. So, like I said, in a couple weeks we have that weird asynchronous week coming up. So we have many disruptions that are going to make this 4 months feel more like 3 months, if that even. And so just understand we don't have a great deal of time, but we're in a very good place. Is what I'm getting at. And so before I move on to the next time period, the modern time period, I just want to kind of look back on what we've done, kind of give you guys or share with you guys some tools that I think will help you study and help you kind of refresh what we've looked at already, so you're kind of in good shape for where we're headed, and really just kind of give you some tools to use long term. So remember, the first part of the class was the post-classical period. That's 1200 actually, not 1250. 1200 to 1450. It's funny, I did this yesterday and didn't even notice that was wrong. And so this map here from Freeman, as a couple others that are in the slides, just kind of puts all the AP stuff together in one place. These are all the people and the places of the world that we focused on in Unit 1. And then this is from a time grid perspective, putting these civilizations kind of side by side, who was controlling where at different times. You can see the Mongol Empire kind of being a common thread through multiple parts here. And so remember, in Unit 1, what we really did was set the stage for the class. So we looked at different geographic regions where civilization was kind of starting to develop or starting to prosper during this time, and just learned about really what was going on in each of these parts of the world. Asia, Dar al-Islam, meaning kind of Middle East, North Africa, South Asia and Southeast Asia, and the Americas and Africa and Europe. So that pretty much covers everywhere, right? And so we touched on everywhere, got a sense of where the world was starting, but remember, it was very kind of general, right? It was really, as you're going to see the SPICE-T charts change from Unit 1 to Unit 4, this was just very general stuff, like no religions, right? Know some names of some states, but it wasn't granular detail, because at the start we were just kind of setting our context. Think about contextualization and that AP reasoning skill. And so we were doing that really for the class. Unit 2 built on Unit 1. It stayed in the same time period, but focused on the exchanges that were going on between people, meaning the networks of exchange, the Silk Roads, the Indian Ocean trade networks, and the Trans-Saharan trade networks, but also included the Mongol Empire. And its position there makes sense because, as we just saw on the time grid, the Mongol Empire kind of covered many regions and acts as almost like a bridging civilization between the post-classical period and the early modern period, where they were really critical in the spread of technology and also certain cultural elements that then lead us into the next era of human civilization. So this SPICE-T chart, as you see, is still pretty general. Starts getting a little bit more detailed about, oops, sorry, I don't know why that went back. Starts getting a little bit more detailed about things like specific technologies that were impacting the economic situation, but also technology just impacting human movements generally. But again, we're talking pretty general terms. And so I've included one of these slides for each of the 2 areas we've done so far. These are not meant to be all you need to know at all, by the way. This is just meant to be like everything on this slide should make complete sense to you by now. If you've been paying attention and trying truly, everything on here should be easy stuff. And so looking at the first one there, the Song to the Yuan dynasty, what does that mean? Who were the Yuan? Who were they? Anyone in the chat? I'm going to prove my point here that this is easy stuff that all of you should know, hopefully. So the Yuan dynasty, who was that? Which group of people are we talking about? Perfect. That's the Mongol Empire. Okay, that's the Mongol dynasty that controlled East Asia, mostly China, but also into Korea at one point. And so remember, it's important to understand this part of Chinese history because we go from Han Chinese control to Mongol control to Han Chinese control and then to Manchu control. And so this movement of back and forth between ethnic Han Chinese control and outside groups, external groups controlling most of what we consider China today, is a really important thing to understand about their history. Now, I don't think you need to know the years these things happen, but you roughly need to know when these things happen and kind of in what order. So if I say the Song dynasty, you should know that we are definitely not talking about the early modern period, that they were gone by then. If I talk about the Qing dynasty, you should know we're talking about the early modern and the modern period, and really even getting into the contemporary period a little bit toward the end. So my point is you should be able to understand that those are different kind of ends of that spectrum, but the Song were not the start. Remember, the Han Chinese were one of the classical civilizations along with the Romans and the Greeks and the ancient Egyptians. So my point here is that this should just be kind of second nature and that you just need to know the broad strokes. You don't need to know exact years. You don't even need to know exact individuals, but you need to kind of roughly know how things happen in time. The Abbasid Caliphate is what kind of took over from the Umayyad Caliphate in Dar al-Islam and then ends up splitting really into the Seljuks being the Turks. This Mamluk dynasty means the Egyptian one, not the Indian one, and the Delhi Sultanate in India. The Mexico or the Mexica in the Aztec Empire or of the Aztec Empire. The Inca, the Hausa kingdoms are another one. But again, these are not everyone. You need to know Ethiopia, you need to know Zimbabwe, but those are countries today that roughly should give you some kind of idea of where we're talking about, where this is not, so I included this one. You need to know things like the fact that Hindu and Buddhist states were who were dominating in South and Southeast Asia at this time, and kind of who were spreading through there. Now, that doesn't mean you need to know, exact conflicts between any of them, but if you see one named, you should be able to position them at least in terms of their geography and also in terms of their religion at this time, and that would be really about it, and understand that Dar al-Islam continued to grow during this time as well. You need to know the big 5 world religions plus Confucianism because of its impact on China. You need to know concepts like imperial bureaucracy, feudalism, manorialism, diaspora, and monsoons. We talked about the networks of exchange before, but you need to understand that all this exchange was predicated on some innovations, things like money existing in the first place in forms of credit, caravanserai and camel saddles. All these things allowed that exchange to happen, which allowed diffusion of culture, religion, science, and knowledge along these trade networks. A couple things would be food and disease, to know that they spread with people. We talked about the Black Death at length, and I think you guys kind of have a pretty good sense of that. When I say Champa rice, who did that primarily benefit? When you think of Champa rice, which of these civilizations do you think of? China, but specifically Song dynasty. So you want to know it's during the Song because that's when it really had the impact on the population, which then has a huge impact on their economic kind of base, that they have a larger population to pull from, essentially. And then, like I said, at the end, the Mongol Khanates act as that kind of bridge civilization between these two eras. And one of the big things with them, remember, is the spread of gunpowder and the spread of gunpowder technology, and then how that goes into this next era in time. So the next era is part 2, the early modern period. That's 1450 to 1750. And there we've got the land-based empires that we learned about, and then also the maritime empires we talked about in Unit 4, the most recent one. So this should be the most fresh in your mind, but remember, these are concurrent. These are at the same time. And in some cases, these are in the same place, like the Inca and Spanish empires were in the same place, just at different times within the era. And this shows you that then again, kind of side by side. My vision here, by the way, is that you could, copy this presentation, put these time grids side by side. If that would work for you, if that would be a good way for you to see things, seeing these side by side in order, kind of slide to slide, could be very useful in terms of kind of studying these empires kind of next to each other in time. So remember, Unit 3, we talked about the land-based empires, but really what we were talking about during this time was how empires legitimized and consolidated their rule. And remember, those weren't, very clear lines. Some things kind of do both, but that was really the focus of this unit, which was a pretty small one compared to the other ones that we've looked at. But you can see already, even in this smaller unit, the level of detail is starting to get more granular. And remember, we talked about that, at the start of the year, that we were going to start in this kind of very broad sense, and then it's going to narrow as we go. Because, well, first of all, as we get closer to our current day, we just know more. We know more detail. There's more history to look at. But also the complexity grows. Remember, I've said this a few times now. If you take nothing away from this year, I want you to understand that our entire history, the entire point of this is just growing complexity. Growing complexity in kind of everything we do and every way we interact, right? That's from the start, things just get more and more complex and more complicated, I guess, until, the end of this. And so this is what I'm getting at. So in the study of history, the information kind of does the same because of the fact that that's really how things manifest and that's really how things are, and that we have better records to be able to talk more about it. But as you can see there, a lot of the focus here is on legitimacy, on consolidation of power, but it was all focused on power and knowing those specific empires there on the left-hand side. Unit 4 should be the most fresh in your memory, so hopefully we can go through that the quickest here. But remember, it was focused on those maritime empires, those 5 European empires that kind of started taking over the world at this point in time. We also talked about the Columbian Exchange, which is a very important historic event to really kind of know and understand the impact of that. So here are the SPICE charts for Unit 4. This will be the first time, or unless you looked at the slides yesterday, the first time you'll be seeing these. But my point, again, is that this is way more granular. Oh, that's weird. I'll have to fix that. I did have these, like I have most of these blocked off so you don't see the lines, but somehow that one got messed up. So I'll fix that in the slides and when I post it. Sorry about that. But this is all connected. This is one section down here. I'm trying to make it pretty intuitive, although that error didn't. But again, the detail here is just more granular. You need to know more specific things about what went on, and so that's why you see quite a bit more text between these two. But remember, these are going to be useful for you in studying for the test because these 2 slides that you see are 17 pages of the CED. Okay, so it's 17 pages condensed down to 2 things you can quickly refer to and hopefully, be able to double check your knowledge and make sure and confirm that you took away what you needed to. So the land-based empires you can see across the top there. Remember, Ming to Qing is a similar transition to Song to Yuan, but different groups, at least in the second. The first 3 there that are highlighted a different color. Why did I do that? What's special about those, or what do we call those 3? Again, anyone? Excellent. They are the gunpowder empires. And so that's an important thing to remember because then the next one in the list there, the Songhai, end up not existing because of their decision not to embrace gunpowder or not to use gunpowder. Russia spreads tremendously from gunpowder, and of course China is where it comes from. The maritime empires you need to know are Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Dutch. You need to know about the schisms that took place or at least exacerbated during this time period. So first of all, being the Reformation between Catholics and Protestants. But remember, that is the second schism in Christianity. The first one is between the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox Church. The second is the Sunni Shia Islam division within Islam. That, again, is pre-existing. That didn't start during this time period. But one thing you need to understand is that it accelerates considerably. And the main reason it accelerates considerably is because of the emergence of the Safavid Empire. Okay, the Safavids were the first Shia state. So before this time frame, the Shia did not have a great deal of political power because they did not control much land. There were a couple cities that were dominantly Shia, but there were no large tracts of land that were Shia. The Safavid Empire is the forerunner to Iran. Same place, they're both Shia. That whole part of the world stays Shia from this time through the current day. And that division between Shia and Sunni, mostly in this region being between Iran and Saudi Arabia, is still an issue today, and that begins during the early modern period. So that's why we highlight that schism, because that was pouring gas on the fire. Okay, there was already a division between the two, but before this time it was really Shia people living in Sunni territory, and that inherently kind of dictated the relationship to an extent. Now the Shia have their own land, which, by the way, is land that was reconquered for them, so to speak, by Sunni warriors. A predominantly Sunni force, as you recall we talked about, was what took that land over. So that also stoked some division here. As I talked about before, Unit 3 was all focused on the legitimization and the consolidation of power. So you need to understand those two and some of the tools that were used to do that. And then going over to the exchange that takes place then in Unit 4, when we have the connection of the hemispheres. You need to understand that all of that, again, is predicated on technology. Just like the expansion of exchange in the post-classical period, where we talked about the networks of exchange and the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trade networks and the Trans-Saharan trade networks, all of those expanding and all of those becoming larger, expanding as opportunities for human interaction. All of that was predicated on technology, and the same happens here. You have better ships, as we talked about. You have better technologies like improved compasses and better astronomical charts. You have better knowledge of ocean and wind current patterns, so travel can be done more efficiently and more safely. All of this exchange only happens because of those advancements, okay? One of the biggest things of this exchange, the Columbian Exchange, was where we had the spread of plants, animals, and diseases across the world, from the old world, meaning Afro-Eurasia, to the new world. Remember, in the old world, you have populations explode because now you have things like potatoes and tomatoes and corn and beans, all of these things being consumed in the rest of the world outside the Americas for the first time. And remember how that made, especially the population, the introduction of corn into China, made that earlier Champa rice example seem like nothing, because the population really explodes. And then that does kind of usher in a new era of at least growth in a sense for China. Remember, in the Americas, the effect was the opposite. In the old world, people died in huge numbers. Some areas essentially just disappeared entirely because of things like smallpox and measles and malaria, which these people had no natural resistance to because they had been isolated from the rest of human civilization for 1,000 years plus. So anyway, my point is that you just need to understand that all this exchange can't happen without the technology, and all this exchange then completely changes the world. Some concepts here you need to know: mercantilism, absolutism, isolationism, colonialism, coerced labor. Chattel slavery is an example of that coerced labor that you need to know specifically. Joint stock company, chartered monopolies, social classes, and syncretism. So now we'll talk about Part 3 in Unit 5 a little bit. So Part 3, as I said, is what we're going to call the modern period. So it kind of makes sense. Early modern, now we're into modern. The time frame you can see there, 1750 to 1900. And I know I've said a couple times that the class that the focus of our history is going to kind of bring us to today, or you can see how it connects to today. But probably a better way to say that is that you can see in each era how it connects to the next. And that's why you can see how it connects to today, because the whole thing connects all the way through. But if it was true for any of these eras, as it kind of makes sense, the one before the one we're living in is the most clear connection. But what I mean by that is you're going to start seeing words, and you're going to start seeing conflicts, and you're going to start seeing maps, and you're going to start seeing images, and you're going to start seeing pictures, and you're going to start seeing cities, all of these things that start looking a lot like the world we're living in, or at least start looking a little bit like the world we're living in. And that's because that's what happens now. And so all I'm getting at there is, if this class hasn't seemed relevant to you thus far, truly try to pay attention here and understand that we really are getting to the start of the era we're living in now to an extent. at least in many ways, in terms of the way social classes are ordered, in the way that we're impacting the planet. All of these things begin now. So Unit 5, Parts 1 and 2, which we're going to focus on Friday on, are the Enlightenment, which is really the underlying intellectual movement that gets all of this going. It's very similar, by the way, in the early modern period to the Renaissance, having a similar push, at least in Europe, in terms of getting Europe into the scientific revolution, which then gets them into exploring and taking over the world, essentially. After that, after these first two parts, most of the rest of this unit, and really even going into Unit 6, are focused on the Industrial Revolution and the consequences of industrialization on the world. But that's because that basically is how we got to this point. So what I'm saying there is the social structures, the political orders, all of that kind of begins now forming. The ones we're living in today begin forming as a result, really, or because of industrialization. So that's what we're going to be kind of going through with these two units. So Unit 5, I already talked about the kind of course of it, so I won't talk about it again. But if you want to refer back and kind of just get a sense of what each little part will be focused on, this would be a good resource to that. But here's the next kind of month or so mapped out, as I like to do for you guys. So this week, I did post on Monday, and I'll officially assign today Chapter 28 as kind of do the notes for that. And you'll see we're going to have one chapter a week for some of the weeks. But the good thing is, and if you look on the weekly overview, I have the full year mapped out for the textbook. It's only one chapter a week, and in a lot of weeks there are no chapters to do. So we've already gone through that initial period of the year where there was a lot to kind of cram in. So now we can really kind of take our time with this. Understand, I'm not having you turn in these notes because I want to be breathing down your neck or I want to annoy you. You need to be creating these notes because you need something you can refer to as we get toward the end of the year, as we get toward May, that makes sense to you, okay? I can't possibly customize this for all of you. I can't know what's inside of you, only you do. So you know when you're taking notes whether you already know about this so you don't need to really put as much in, or hey, you've never heard of this before so you really need to put this in, or hey, you're very visual so this needs to be done in a Venn diagram instead of just a list of bullets, or whatever it is. You know that better than I do. You know yourself better than I do. So that's why I'm having you do these things, so you create a resource that will help you in May. This is for no other reason than that, okay? So just kind of know that's why. So we're going to kind of follow this course of topics. I don't follow the assignment things as kind of gospel at this point. This could still be subject to change as I decide to massage things. For instance, I'm probably not going to be giving this activity on Thursday, Friday. We're probably going to do that on day one next week, because what I've decided in looking at the actual curriculum as I'm really planning this out now in kind of detail is we don't spend much time on the political revolutions. We don't really talk much about the governments, and I think you need to know about those. And so I want that to really be our focus of the next class. That's 5.2, the actual political revolutions. And so I think what I'm going to do is instead make the main activity for Friday be focused on that, and then we can kind of worry about the documents next week. But there's a big group of documents you need to know about, and so I want to give you guys some time with those to, kind of use those and know what they are. But the topics will stay the same. So today's introduction, 5.1, 5.2, next class, and so on and so forth. This is that weird asynchronous week, which now may change. We may not have asynchronous classes those days. I don't know if you knew about this already, but the plan for that week is Monday and Wednesday are holidays, because Monday is MLK Day and Wednesday is the Inauguration Day. But then Tuesday and Thursday are going to be asynchronous days, and Friday is an early release day. So what that means is for you guys, I only have Friday with you, because Monday is not going to be an actual asynchronous day. I'm going to post AP Classroom, but you're going to have 2 weeks to do this, so I'm just going to post it then. It's like, here's what you should be working on, but you're going to have the 2 weeks. So we won't have asynchronous on Monday. We won't have class on Wednesday. So that week, I only have you for a short day on Friday as it stands right now. A smarter way to do this would have been to change the schedule and have Tuesday and Thursday be normal days where, like we did 1 and 2 and only had 1 day a week. But I'm just a teacher and not an admin. So anyway, It's going to be a little bit tricky that week. It may change still because of the change to the back to school plans. They don't know yet. We're figuring that out, I guess, or they're figuring that out and letting us know. But what I'm getting at is I am going to be posting some asynchronous work for everyone on Tuesday. And then on Friday, we will have some class time, so you'll have a little bit of time to do that. But I would really encourage you to look at the stuff before then. Try to look at it on Tuesday or Thursday, because there will be more than you could possibly do on Friday, and that's because we just don't have the time to just skip a week in the middle of this. Like I'm trying to keep you guys on track to be ready in May, so we never really have to have any more of those crammed in periods like we did to start the year. And if we just start skipping weeks, that's really not going to work. So there will be a little bit, but it will only be 2 topics, so it's going to be a smaller week because it just has to be in kind of what it is. And then the following week will be the assessment week. Again, I'm going to combine the test LEQ activity. Where I can, I'm trying to do that to just give you guys less to do overall. And then the following week will be into Unit 6. This is the week they'll make decisions about back to school. So then from there, we'll find out what we're doing next. So I don't have beyond that planned as much right now because we don't really know where we're going to be. In Unit 5, this is what we'll be talking about. You'll notice these concepts are not in order, but this is the order in which we're actually going to discuss them. So we're going to start by talking about this period of revolution and rebellion that's going on in the world at this period of time and some of the new nation states that emerge. Then we'll move into industrialization and changes to the global economy, and then really end in terms of the impact of all of this in terms of making a globalized trade world, a capitalist globalized world that's really interacting, in a way similar to where we are today, just with worse technology. So here's the map from this unit. I wouldn't expect all of this to be familiar to you as yet, because we're just starting. But you'll see, we're going to talk about colonization, so that's why you see Africa much more filled in. And I did talk about how France would eventually make their presence known here. You can see some of the revolutions that we'll be talking about as well. But like I said, this might not make sense as yet, but I will say if you had breakfast this morning and ate a banana, or later on today need to go open a bank account, these logos might look familiar to you because these are companies that still exist today. And when we look at the time grid, you'll see the same thing: Coca-Cola, right? Mercedes. So all I'm getting at is you're going to see more and more things that start looking like, hey, I know what that is, because these things still exist to this day. Here's the time grid for this period in time. Again, you might want to put it kind of next to the other time grid. Remember, the British Empire really takes over kind of India here. The Mughal Empire exists for a little bit, but they're not really powerful because at this point they were already pretty much not in charge because the Marathas were. So anyway, and I actually looked at the wrong side of the line. That's here. This is in Africa, so ignore me. But what I'm saying, yeah, that was actually before this time frame, so definitely ignore me. I was just trying to point out that the Mughal Empire, you see them there, but they're not really a very big thing. That's all I was trying to say. At this point in time, they were in the last time frame. So when we talk about revolutions, there's kind of 2 fronts or two main areas: intellectual and political. So like I said, next class we'll talk about the Enlightenment and then the political revolutions and some of the nationalist movements that unified Germany, unified Italy, those kind of things. And then the rest of the unit will focus on the Industrial Revolution and then some of the impact of the Industrial Revolution, which is really more these other intellectual revolutions like liberalism that emerges and feminism and suffrage and the suffrage movement. But like I said, that will be the rest of the unit. And that's why, by the way, I want to spend so much time next class on the political revolutions, because we just won't really come back to it too much, except to talk about how those states then interact with industrialization. But it's probably important you know who those states are before we get to that. So once we move our focus to industrialization, we'll kind of really center things mostly in causes and effects. Of course, causes are mostly centered around technology, but also better resource exploitation, better transportation, better communication, and then some of those states actually specifically trying to modernize. And then effects, this is where I said, you're going to start seeing words that seem familiar. We talk about a fight between, capitalism or free trade and more labor-centric political movements like socialism and communism. that is still a discussion through this day. Now, it's not always talked about in the most accurate terms in the world, but it is still a struggle or still a fight through this day. We just looked at a few transnational corporations. Those really start now in a big way. New social classes are going to emerge during this time frame, particularly the middle class and the working class, which again should be not just terms, but also that class struggle is something that persists through this day, where we've had a middle class in decline here for quite a while. So what I'm getting at is these dynamics begin at this point, and of course you had growing urbanization, growing poverty, and growing pollution. The pollution actually, some would say that during this time period through our current is when we're living in a new epoch in the Earth's history called the Anthropocene. Basically, the time period in which you can actually see the impact of human civilization. In other words, if we all died before the industrial era and aliens came millions of years from now, they probably wouldn't be able to tell that humans existed. Now, because of industrialization and what we've done to the planet, you will always know that humans lived here. Not always, but you know what I mean. For the foreseeable future, our mark on the planet will be very clearly seen. And so, like I said, we're still living in the kind of end of that era of hopefully at the end of that era, or I guess one way or the other at the end of that era of extreme environmental degradation. So your task for the day is going to be this, number 127. I'm going to continue this format. Remember, this is the first year I've taught AP, so I'm kind of learning how I think is best to approach these things. And I like this idea of having there be 3 parts for your writing activities, where you're first going to write the thing, then you're going to explain what you did in the analysis, and then you're going to reflect on how you could have done it better in the reflection. Okay, so I think having those 3 parts is will be very useful for you to really understand what you're doing. So let me talk real kind of generally about the LEQ2 and kind of what my observations were. So overall, as it says there, and if you had me last year, I don't just say things to try to make you guys feel better. I'm pretty honest with this stuff. Overall, the writing has improved. Like as a group, your writing is much better than it was at the start of the year, truly. And that's great. It really is, because that's, we're getting closer to where we need to be. At the start of the year, we were not even a little bit close to where we needed to be. As a whole, a couple of you were going to be fine if you didn't even know who I was and just went and took a test. You'd probably be fine. But for the most part, the improvement is very clear and marked. Really, it is. But let's talk about a few kind of issues or a few kind of concerns. So the first thing I would say is when you're looking at Part D, which is your reasoning and analysis, make sure you are specifically and explicitly referring to the AP reasoning processes. Now, I don't mean say, in this paragraph, I will use AP reasoning process. I'm not saying that. But specifically use words like continuity and change and causation and comparison. Specifically point out that you are doing the thing you are told to do. Okay, the reason I'm saying that is because this is not writing for writing's sake. You are not writing just to show us how smart you are and how much you know. Okay, I know most of your writing up until this point has pretty much been that. Like, just show us how clever you are. There's your A. You've done great. That's not what we're doing here. You are doing a formulaic thing that has to have specific parts to get points. You could write the best essay that's ever been written, and if you do not address the specific parts of the rubric, you'll still get a 0. Okay, so it's really important. So when you're looking at the reasoning and analysis section, try to be very clear about what you're doing, just to make it as easy as you can on the grader so they really can completely understand what you were doing. Okay, you should not leave much up to chance or to assumption. The next thing, and probably the most important thing, is your thesis. Okay, now for the most part, we're at least having a thesis now, which is good, but some did not. Remember, your thesis needs to be a historically defensible claim, but beyond being defensible, that doesn't mean it could possibly theoretically be defended. It means that you can defend. You have to be prepared to be able to defend what you just said. Specifically, will be able to defend in some way. But it's not just that, okay? It needs to, and this is equally important, it needs to actually respond to the prompt and all parts of the prompt. Okay, there were a few of you, and you got this feedback individually, but that basically saw the prompt and then wrote about something that was like tangentially related to that prompt instead of just answering the question. You are answering a question in this activity. It's a long essay question, right there in the name. Okay, so make sure you are actually responding to it. And today, when you're answering these 5 questions, note, by the way, that your responses should be about a paragraph in length. I'm not looking for a specific AP style here. I just want you to actually engage with these questions. I'm asking you them because I think that they matter. I think that they will help you in May. So that's why we're doing this, all right? But anyway, so about a paragraph each, and we're probably going to move more toward that where for a lot of these things, I'm going to probably start asking more general questions and giving you more latitude in how to answer with longer answers. But that's because as we get closer to the test, I need to hold your hand less. You need to be more kind of able or willing to engage with that critical thinking on your own. So that's kind of why that transition you'll see happening as we get closer to the test. So in the activity, there's going to be 3 parts. In part 1, which you just saw on the other screen, you're going to review the LEQ grading rubric and then answer a couple questions about it. The reason I'm having you do so much work with the rubric is so you really understand it going into May. Okay, this is what you're going to be judged on. So again, if you write the best essay that's ever been written and it doesn't do these things, then you are not going to get points. And that's particularly true with the thesis because the thesis has this cascading effect. Remember, your evidence is going to support your thesis. Your analysis and reasoning is going to connect your evidence to your thesis. So if your thesis doesn't work, it makes these 2 parts very hard to do. So it'd be very easy for a lot of you to get a 1 out of 6 on the essay because you had a terrible thesis that didn't let you do these 2 things, so you just provided some contextualization, hopefully, and that was all that was present. Okay, so don't do that. That's all I'm saying. In part 2, I want you to reflect on where you think you could have improved in your response. Now, you've already given some kind of feedback in your LEQ2 analysis, okay? So I would encourage you to look at the LEQ2 analysis. That's what the document tells you to do, and read your own comments. But look at the essay and really think about it. And really read the essay, by the way. Don't just skim it. Really read what you wrote and really think about what you wrote and decide how you think you could have improved it. Then in the last part, I want you to go back to the original activity. I want you to look at the prompt, restate the prompt in your own words. So you tell me, what does this prompt mean? And then you tell me, what is a successful response to this prompt? Now, that doesn't mean give me a response. I'm not saying actually respond. I'm saying tell me what parts need to be there. What are the things that would have to be included for a response to be valid? And then the last question is to look at the feedback that I gave you and reflect on what you need to do to be a better writer, better student, better prepared for May. That's not talking about your essay specifically. I'm talking generally, what do you need to do to improve to be kind of ready for May? All right? I wanted to share with you first a little schedule change that won't really affect our class, but it will affect your classes overall, so it's good for you to know, and also kind of has changed the way I've approached things. So this week here is not going to be an asynchronous week, all right, as it was before. But remember, it was always going to be the same for you. So we still will have Wednesday off, we have Monday off, and then I'll only see you guys that one time on Friday on an early release day. I am probably going to post a video of what I talk about in class on the 21st for you guys to hopefully watch. I've been debating. What I think I might actually do is do that on the 19th, and I think that's probably what I will do. Do that on the 19th, so then you guys have 2 days to kind of engage with that content, because I'm going to kind of post and just ask you to watch it on your own time, because we're going to have a short day that day, and I want to give you guys the full time for the activity that we'll be working on, with kind of supervision, or not supervision, but with me here to kind of help out, basically. And so I did change the topics a little bit. I moved a couple forward, but that was because this week is going to be weird. What I'm going to do now, I think, is just have this one extra day for the other class be kind of an extra activity. I'll post it for you guys so you could look at it and do it if you want to, if you want the experience. But I'm certainly not going to make you guys do it. You don't have that time in class, so I don't want to kind of force extra things upon you either. Except, like I said, I will ask you to watch that little video just so we can make up the time in the early release that we're we're going to miss, just so we don't miss much time, because I'm trying to keep us on this really good track, because we're exactly where we should be, and I don't want to fall behind that point, because who knows what else, between now and May will throw at us. So today's Revolutions in Nationalism and the Enlightenment. That's 5.2 and 5.1. So we're going to start at 5.1, of course. I'm not going to go through this page. We never just kind of read things line by line like that. But I put it here, so if you're going through these slides later, you could do so. By the way, these are posted to Google Classroom. If you want to go through them, they're under the Unit 5 slides. So anyway, so if you ever want to kind of look at that, you have that there. Remember, I post the topic pages too, so there's multiple ways you could have this, but I think it's useful there. It is sometimes for me, because if I want to kind of qualify something or clarify something, is what I meant to say, I can do so just by going back to that page and then kind of making sense of it. So it's nice. I wanted to connect these time periods for you because they really are connected, and so. We're going to start talking about Europe more and more, and you've heard me multiple times already, if you had me last year a bunch, kind of complain about the Eurocentrism in our curriculum, and it's certainly there. But in the more recent history, it kind of makes sense to be there, and the reason for that is because Europe did, in this period of time, kind of take over the world, and then, in the Americas, most of the countries are dominated at least by the descendants of Europeans. And so, their impact on, not just Europe, but the Americas and Africa and some parts of Asia, and then that's pretty much everywhere. And Australia, by the way, is the same, right, in terms of being controlled by European descendants. So my point is that the reason that things go that kind of Eurocentric is that, for large sections of the world, there's a huge amount of European influence, and in some areas, outright control. And so that's why the curriculum kind of goes that way. It's just the real way that our recent history manifested. And this kind of gets started back in the Renaissance. So the Renaissance is the rebirth of Western European intellectualism, basically. The rebirth of people in Western Europe trying is really what it seems like is the best way to describe it. But remember that they were kind of in this Middle Ages, this lull after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, and they fragmented into smaller areas. You had feudalism then, and really people were citizens of the farm they worked at, and that was pretty much their life. I'm talking about serfs here, but that was most people. But then in the Renaissance, you have the emergence of humanism, the idea that individuals matter, or at least that individuals should be celebrated a bit, that there's some importance beyond just God and beyond just the church. So before this point in Western Europe, your life existed more or less to please and serve God. And now it did not. Now you had some amount of personal worth at this point as well. Now, I'm not trying to say everyone felt that way, but that was the kind of dominant theme of the culture. And so that at that time you had then some growing secularism, because the idea, of course, here is, well, actually, let me do what I did yesterday. Secularism. Anyone in the room, what does secularism mean, or secular mean? Anyone whatsoever? Prove you're awake, please. Yeah. Let's focus, or less kind of guidance from religion, less being rooted in religion, right? So the society at this time becomes a little bit more secular. Yeah, exactly. Now, it's not to say that like religion disappeared. Like religion was still there and was still very important, but it became a little bit less important. And so that opened the door for some other things to happen, and that goes to the next step there, the Reformation. So you have the Protestant Reformation being that second schism in Christianity, where the Catholic Church splits into the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches. And that then kind of becomes a layer of the political infighting that's going on at that time. And that connects to mercantilism, because remember, these states, these early European states, were mercantile. They believed that the world only had so much stuff, and they had to go get as much of it as they could for the betterment of their societies. And so religion becomes like a layer in that political debate, whether they're Christian, but whether they're the Protestant Christian or whether they're Roman Catholic, becomes a major point there. And sometimes those lines get blurrier. Remember, France actually allies with the Protestants, even though they were Catholic themselves, because they were trying to tamp down the Habsburg dominance during this time. Remember, the Habsburgs at one point under Charles I control basically Germany, Italy, and Spain and Portugal. So they've got France surrounded. By the time they're actually fighting, I think that this is after that, but either way, it doesn't matter. The interesting thing here is that you had the Catholics allying with the Protestants against the Catholics, because that political layer was more important to them in that moment, or that political lens, rather, was more important to them in that moment. And so that's relevant to mercantilism because, you know, those two things were happening side by side and more or less interacting with each other. So these states were able to expand because of technological developments, better ships. We've talked about all that. And that really is a part, not all of, but is a part of the scientific revolution that goes on, which is directly tied to that secularism, is directly tied to that chipping away of religious authority, because now you didn't have one church in charge of everyone that could say science is evil, burn them all. Now you had a few different churches around that could say, hey, well, you know, we'll let some science happen. And then other people see that the science is happening and improving things or bettering this or that. And it just allows those things, gives them space to actually happen. All right, so then that goes into the next period of kind of waking up or intellectual growth. And that's the Enlightenment. So these two movements feel very similar in Europe, okay? Because you have kind of a move toward here, empiricism and reason, which we're going to talk about in a second. Nationalism and nationalism is kind of the main political kind of shift during this time, and we're going to talk about that as well. And there's also the influence of the Enlightenment on some reform movements that have certainly political implications themselves. And then you also then at this time, of course, have growing secularism. You have a complete questioning of the role of God. So you can kind of directly see that, you know, the Renaissance and Enlightenment have some similar elements, and then the Enlightenment kind of feeds then into the next period of big change. And this isn't, you know, the Reformation, it's not a split in the church, but it's the revolutions that go on across really the world, some of them being political, some of them being movements of borders or movements of governments, but some of them being, you know, revolutions of thought really as well. So that's the industrial revolutions, and some of the kind of financial or economic revolutions that take place at this time too, between capitalism and socialism and communism. So these are all things we're going to go through really in the course of Unit 5. So the Enlightenment, like I said, new ways of understanding involved empiricism. Empiricism is just the idea that knowledge is based on what you can see, what you can experience, what you can sense, what you can observe, however you want to say that. It's based on real, tangible things. It's based on data, evidence, and observation. What you should take from that is before this time, there was a fair amount of knowledge that was based on myth and kind of outright theory, just guessing about how things worked as well. A lot of medical stuff was that way. But now the way people expected knowledge to be arrived at changed, and people started expecting knowledge to be based on some sort of objective reality, objective truth. Like I said before, you had a re-examination of the role of religion, and particularly the role of religion in public life. So public life is really just kind of your experience with government, your interaction with not just government, but also government and institutions and kind of society as a whole, like your public life. Like in my public life, I am a high school history teacher that, you know, is a citizen of the United States and Virginia, and all that. That's my public life. And so the role of religion in that public life shifted and became much less important during this time. You also have kind of a reason for that, and kind of the thing that fills that vacuum then is reason, and the idea that kind of reason and logic should be, you know, more important in the way we make our decisions. And you can see how that would be related to a society that's moving to a more empirical model, that if you're basing, if you're going to base your knowledge on reality, then kind of the underlying way you kind of approach information is probably going to change too. You had new political ideas that emerged at this time. We're going to talk about natural and legal rights, and also the social contract here in a second. And then the thing to kind of understand is that these ideas that were questioning traditions and questioning established norms really kind of precede the ability of revolutions to happen. Like, people have to start questioning everything before they're willing to make some big changes. And I mean, I'm certainly not trying to say we're entering a period of revolution, but we probably are entering a period of change. And I think that, you know, you could see that many people now, I guess since Wednesday for the first time, are, you know, questioning norms, right? Questioning how did things that we thought were one way not actually be that way. So I guess all I'm trying to say is you can see how societies still deal with this, and probably will be forever. So a couple key concepts you're going to want to know about the social contract and kind of natural laws, or natural and legal rights. So the social contract it's not to say that Hobbes creates it, but it kind of gets popularized by him. and it's in his work Leviathan, where he more or less establishes the idea that all people are selfish, all people are self-serving, and we give up some of our freedoms, we give up some of that inherent selfishness in exchange for rules and safety. Because if you just allow all of us to be selfish to no end, if you allow, kind of a pure, human greed model to rule the world, it's going to end up in a pretty bad place, and we're going to be pretty afraid. Because we should be. Society would not be functioning in that model. So we give up some of that because we have this fear. We have this fear of each other and the way we all kind of act. So that's really the core of it. And there's a video here afterwards. I'm not going to make you watch now, but it's there if you want to watch it when you're looking at this, hopefully later. I would encourage you to do so because it really explains the social contract in depth. I just, we only have so much time. So Locke kind of changes the idea a little bit, merges it with natural rights, which we'll talk about on the other side. Rousseau merges it with the idea of general will. Now, the general will is basically the kind of popular, meaning what most of us want and need. So his idea was like, we give up those rights and freedoms for a government that fulfills our needs and wants to a level, at least, to an acceptable level. Not entirely, but enough. And for Hobbes, this wasn't the case. Hobbes believed that you had to have absolute rule. You had to have an absolute monarch in charge to be able to essentially efficiently guarantee those rights and safety. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So you had to have that absolute control so people would be willing to give up those freedoms in the first place. Rousseau did not see it that way. So there was all I'm trying to get at is there were different interpretations of what that contract meant. It wasn't just one idea. You can see some believers in this theory there. Natural and legal rights were used as kind of a justification of the social contract, because your natural rights are your God-given rights, your inherent rights as a person, as a living human. These are just your rights, and no one there's not one set, right? We all have kind of different ideas in our head of what those natural rights are. But to an extent, I think most of us, and especially now that we've lived in societies that are under these, kind of guiding principles, believe we have a right to speech, for instance, within reason. Again, going back to the idea of it being kind of violent or violence inciting, maybe not, or definitely not. Sorry, I meant maybe like sarcastically there. But for most other things, I think we agree that free speech is generally pretty good, and so that's an example of a natural right. Whereas legal rights are rights given to you by the government or by your leadership, whoever that however you want to say that, whether it's an absolute monarch or a democratic republic, you get those from the state. And so that was kind of the merging of these two ideas. Understand though, like your natural rights, like I said, were not one set of rights. So some people believed at this time natural rights meant white men, and that was it. Some people thought natural rights meant everyone, that all people, all humans. Some would have said all men, some would have said all white people. You would have had very different views within Europe about what that meant, but it was a change from the way things had been before, where you essentially really had no rights unless you were nobility, and then you were pretty well off. This idea of natural rights and natural laws become important parts of key documents you're going to need to know, like the Declaration of Independence and of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in France. So we're not going to talk too much about those today, but you will next week on day one. This is that video, which we're not going to watch. Let's see if it lets me just skip. Sorry, it's trying to load. All right, cool. So these are some philosophers you're going to want to know. We are going to be, this will be that optional activity on that extra day. So like I said, I would encourage you to engage with that, but at the very least, make sure you know the stuff that's on this slide, essentially, what these people were associated with and when they were, don't know the years, but know that Hobbes was kind of a founder of this movement in a sense, and that Rousseau comes toward the end. Like that's what I mean. I'm not expecting you to know exactly which years. You should know where they were from. I mean, England and France, it's only two countries, so it's pretty easy to kind of grasp. But yeah, so this is just some information about them. Again, I don't want to go through them all because I want to make sure you have enough time to complete the activity today. So that's just there as information for you that I'd encourage you to review. Now, the Enlightenment does influence some reform movements that kind of get going at this time, but the thing I want to point out is that the Enlightenment was part of it, but there was also a push for this from some religious groups. And what's interesting about any time this happens, so when there was the Protestant Reformation, hopefully you remember me talking about the Catholic Counter-Reformation. And what I'm pointing to here is the fact that when there is change societally, it kind of forced the church, or now the church is, to hold a mirror up to themselves and really consider changing some of their norms so they could stay relevant to a current society. And this is something that the Catholic Church still grapples with today, about trying to stay relevant to a modern population. I'm sure others do too. I cite the Catholic Church because they intentionally talk about it at least a lot. Not to necessarily say they do much, but at least they're talking about it. So these two kind of come together in a sense here, even though they're kind of opposing each other, not outright, but hopefully you get what I mean there, to kind of push for the expansion of some rights for some groups. One group are women, so you have emergent feminism or early feminism and the suffrage movements that kind of push norms around the political structures of the day, which were very patriarchal, but still are. The Senate today is 25% women. The House is 24% women. The United States is 50-point-something% women. So it's slightly more women than men. My point is our political structures do not reflect our population in gender or race. So those are areas we still have progress to make. Now, I'm not saying it should exactly match up, but it probably should ebb and flow. Like the percentage of women in Congress should probably be between 40 and 60% at any given time, because it should ebb and flow a bit, but it shouldn't be 25%. It should be a quarter. Like half of the people are women. It doesn't make sense. So anyway, you had abolitionist movements as well that kind of emerged at this time to push for the end of slavery. Here, that was successful in 1863 when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. That's during the Civil War, of course. And you had in Russia similar efforts in a lot of ways to end serfdom, which wasn't slavery, but it was pretty close. I mean, the people that were still serfs at this point did not have much in the way of rights. But think about that. There were still serfs at the same time. Like I think in our head we think of serfdom as a Middle Ages thing that ended the Renaissance. It did not. It continued for 400 years or 500 years, depending on where you mark the Renaissance. I know we say it's like the mid 1300s of the Renaissance, but in my head it's like 1400s about right, or the 15th century. So it's 400 or 500 years. So all I'm getting at is it's still persisted for a while and ends 2 years before chattel slavery does here with the Emancipation Manifesto under Alexander II. So these are 3 documents you're going to want to know. We're going to be working with documents next week, so we're not going to go through them now. But these were 3 key documents of emerging feminism that kind of moved that movement forward. You had nationalism as a growing force at this time because essentially people were questioning everything, including how they should be organized. So people started developing new kind of identities for themselves, and you have new entire nationalities that emerged at this time, like German and Italian. And so a lot of times they were basing these commonalities on things like language and religion, which kind of makes sense, social customs and norms, or territory and location, just where they were, where they happened to be. A lot of times this growing nationalism was used by governments to promote unity and gain legitimacy, and also sometimes to kind of outright control their people, as we'll learn as we get into the next time period, when we get into World Wars I and II. Nationalism can be used for bad as well. So, but yeah, nations start using that as a thing, for better or for worse at this time. And the bottom line here is that nationalism becomes a force that just completely changes the way states develop across the world. So it becomes a new, I don't want to say type of government, because the government's kind of changed, but the way we pick rulers and the way we organize ourselves with each other kind of changed a lot. So we're going to talk about nationalism now. Same deal. I'm not going to go through these kind of one by one, but we will talk about the large points here. So kind of the bottom line for the revolution side of this is that it starts now. So in the 18th century, really in the 19th century is when you see this become a big phenomenon. You can see a list there. Now that's not the list. The list is much longer. There are many more revolutions. I just picked some at random that I thought you may find were interesting / were kind of particularly important. So like the United States and France, I think, are two that stand out early. And then Haiti's a huge one. I really encourage you guys to learn about Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. Serbia is interesting because it's the first one to break away from the Ottomans, and then the others. Just this is when the Latin American movements start, going. One thing I think is funny that Argentina was, toward the start, because it just kind of naturally makes sense with them being further away. And Chile's next. Like, I know it seems silly, but it's like you look at the map, like, oh, I get that actually. Like, if you're Spain, it's like, all right, yeah, that's pretty far. We're gonna kind of not try to be as influential there. It makes sense. And then Greece breaking away from the Ottomans, I just thought you may find interesting. Brazil breaks away from Portugal, of course, and then the Philippines much later do as well. We're gonna, there's some resources I'm going to post for that. Again, I'd encourage you to try to kind of learn more about that one too, because those are two examples, Haiti and the Philippines, that I raised that are specifically mentioned in the CED. So you had growing resentment over kind of the harshness of absolute rulers, a lot of them being monarchs, but not entirely. And if we're questioning everything, we question the monarch. Let's think about new ways to lead ourselves. So that's when you have the emergence of classical liberalism. This is in the CED, they call it 19th century liberalism. But essentially what we're talking about there is the idea of a role for the state to guarantee and protect individual rights. You can see how this is tied to the natural rights we were talking about before. But it's a push for growing personal freedom. But again, that would have meant different things to different people. And some people would have meant more individual freedoms for white men, and others meant for everyone. So there was a spectrum, but at the start it was, of course, dominated by white men as the people that were in charge of these governments at this time, in a kind of complete way. Democracy is not a new idea, of course, but it's re-emergent at this time. So you have classical democracies that we learned about, Greece, Rome, those kind of things, but those ideas had kind of been shelved, and we had, Europe at least had lived under absolute, mostly monarchist rule for most of this time, so that there was not a great deal of freedom. Again, remember, Western Europe's mostly serfs, so the idea of democracy was just very far from the way these people were living. But now it finds its way and kind of reemerges and starts impacting governments as these new ones form. And it also gets used, or not used, but it gets kind of useful for national unification movements and national liberation movements that start kind of appearing all over the world, but also leads to some disputes around borders and which nations will be nations. So as I talk through here, you'll see on the right that GIF will move and kind of show you how South America changes over this time, but it changes quite a bit. But I guess the thing to understand is this gets started in the Americas, in the United States. We were the first ones to do it. I'm not chest beating there, it's just the fact of the matter is we were the first. And we kind of became a model or an inspiration for a lot of these other independence movements that would follow. You have the French Revolution that slightly follows, so that's a good bit of trivia for you. We are older than France, even though we are not older than France. But that relationship's funny thinking about this next one. So like I said, the Haitian Revolution is one you're going to want to know a fair bit about. And this was really a successful rebellion of enslaved people. And they successfully were able to take over. Now, it's not actually that surprising because the population balance was insanely tilted toward the enslaved. In other words, there were way more enslaved people in Haiti than there were wealthy landowning and non-enslaved people as well. So the numbers just made it, I don't want to say easy because they obviously weren't as well resourced. So I'm not trying to take away anything, don't get me wrong, it's inspirational. But the numbers were certainly in their favor. But anyway, they were able to take over, and so that was the birth of Haiti as a new nation. But you might notice today we don't talk about Haiti as a world power. And it's interesting because Haiti was the most profitable colony in the Americas. Haiti was more profitable than the 13, at the same time, Haiti was more profitable than the 13 of us over here, the 13 colonies combined. It was. So they were resource rich, and but now that being, to be fair, there a lot of that was on the backs of a very brutal, widespread enslaved labor system. But my point is, they still were well resourced. That they still did have a lot of stuff that with this nation takes over has natural resources that should have pushed them towards success. However, remember, this was a successful rebellion of enslaved people. The people that were in charge were not white. And that meant they got treated and interacted with the Europeans that surrounded them in a very different way. And so the United States had France, even though it didn't exist yet, but had French people. I'm joking, obviously, hopefully you get that. Had France as an ally. Shortly after the war, even though we had just fought with them, we start trading with the British because we all like money. And so eventually we're like, all right, we still don't like each other, but let's go ahead and do some trading. That didn't happen with Haiti. Haiti was kind of ostracized. Haiti was kind of left on an island. I know that's actually a bad pun. I didn't mean that. I meant like the the analogy version. But my point is Haiti was on its own, and so that finds its way through today, where you could tell two very different stories about Haiti, about this inspirational rebellion that fought off their European masters, owners, and successfully formed a nation. And it's amazing. It's wonderful. But because of subsequent things, it's not led to the best outcomes in that part of the world. So it's a really interesting kind of case study in very structural, very strong racism. And then the next are the Latin American revolutions that kind of follow, inspired by what happened in the U.S. and Haiti. And so that's the kind of freeing, or the independence movements, at least, of Latin America. You want to know Bolivar as well as a name. Here are 3 documents that you'll want to know. Again, we're going to go through documents on the first day next week, so I'm not going to do too much with them here, but there are a few that you'll want to kind of know about. And then you have these national unification movements that kind of are all over the place. In the Philippines, they were hoping to actually unify with Spain, that they wanted to become a part of Spain, that fully, but that's not obviously the way that it went. All of these ones are kind of ones you're going to want to know about. So I'm not going to go into them now, because I'm going to, when I do the weekend session, kind of really break all of these out and kind of go through each one. Again, time-wise, that would be the rest of class, and then you wouldn't have time to work on the next thing we're going to work on. So just to kind of show you, though, how those unification movements, had an impact. This is at the start of the period, Central Europe, and you can see this is a whole bunch of tiny little states, and Italy itself is not, a state. Now, remember, before this time, most of this through North Italy was the Holy Roman Empire, and then you have the Papal States, in the middle, and then South Italy and Sicily and Sardinia, were part of Spain, actually, for a lot of that. So anyway, all I'm getting at here is that all of this was very segmented through the early modern period, through the start of our period, and then this becomes Germany, and Italy becomes Italy. And then the Balkans, at the start of this period of time, you actually have the Ottoman Empire in charge, and they'll grow. So they'll actually, in this period, continue growing and kind of get up into here a little bit. But then by the end of this period, you have these emergent nation states. This is the Balkan nationalism bullet point from that last slide. So again, these are all interesting things to know about. And then you have Greece as well emerging at this time. So it's just really interesting to me that by the end of this time, we're certainly getting closer to modern Europe. Germany doesn't quite look like what it will look like, but we're getting quite close. So your activity today, and it is posted, is to go through these videos. So there's 3 videos in each of 3 sections. I want you to watch at least 1 video from each section, and then answer just 1 question. I'm asking for a paragraph, so 4 sentences, but it's just 1 sentence one answer, 1 question for each video. I do encourage you to watch more than 1 if you can, and if you find them interesting. I mean, I really do, because every single thing on here is directly tied to one of the things from the CED. So what I'm getting at is there's nothing on here that there's no chance it'll be on the AP test. Anything from any of these videos very likely could. Remember, the Freeman videos are actually Freeman. He teaches in Loudoun County, and so he's an AP World History teacher, but has been doing it for a long time. So he's very, has a very good track record with this stuff. Kind of like Heimler, except I find Freeman a little bit more. I don't know. I like him a little bit more. Anyway, there are some crash course ones, of course, because I love forcing you to watch John Green. No, it's not that. It's just that there's not a lot of good options for a lot of these things, unfortunately. Trust me, I try. I really do. It's funny. I really wanted to have one of the videos about women's rights be women speaking. I really did. And I probably watched like 10 different videos about women speaking that just didn't really have the right content or were way too long. You know, some of them were getting like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, or were way too short. Some of them were just like really short little blurbs, which wouldn't really cover enough. So it's just, you know, I try to, you know, be intentional about this stuff, but it's difficult. If you find yourself finishing early, of course, you could watch the other videos. At the end of this document, there are resources there that you could go through. If you didn't finish your LEQ2 reflection, you could finish that. There's all kinds of things. You definitely have enough stuff to fill the time. But finish this first. And this should take about the amount of time you have remaining. You have 37 minutes remaining at this time. So you should be able to get it done, I would think. One last tip, and I'll shut up. Watch the videos if you find this useful for you. Watch the videos at 1.5 speed. That's the fastest you can watch them without your learning being negatively impacted. There's been some recent research, and at least at this moment in time, we think 1.5 is a pretty good clip for listening to things faster. So just a tip if you would like.